G'day Grumpies and welcome to another edition of Grumpy Old Bloke, the Vinyl Collection. Today I embark upon, with some trepidation, today we're covering the Beatles box set vinyl collection released in 2013. The reason I'm a little bit reticent to go down this particular avenue is A, the Beatles are very much in the news again at the moment with the release of Get Back. I've seen episode 1 and it's brilliant. The reason that I'm a little bit anxious about going into this is because I know Beatles fans are fairly rabid and some of them can be a little bit pedantic. Let me just get this straight at the very beginning. I love the Beatles. I'm a Beatles fan. I'm not a Beatles tragic. I don't collect Beatles per se, and they're not a focus of my collection, but they're very much part of my my collection. So I don't have by any means a definitive collection of the Beatles. Now, having said that, one of my best friends, someone I grew up with in the UK, is one of the foremost Beatles music collectors. If he wants to come on the show and go through his Beatles collection, I am more than welcome to enable that. However, not my level of knowledge. Many of you regular viewers will notice that this actually belongs to that up there. That sits on that shelf all the time. That's the slipcase. This is the contents thereof. The reason that that's up there normally and not on the Calyx unit, is a lot of this going on today, not on the Calyx unit, is because this box set doesn't fit on the Calyx unit, which is really annoying. This is the American edition of the 2013 re-release box set. The American one does vary from the British one in a few nuanced ways. Mostly that the fact the British one fits on the Calyx shelf apparently, but you know, we'll let that slide. I live in Australia. Now, as such, we are fairly limited on the records that come into this country. First and foremost, I prefer, as I've already said in previous episodes, to collect music from the country of origin of the band. So ideally I would like the British version of these things, but living in Australia I'm a little bit limited. The choices we have in Australia generally is we have what we're given, what we can buy on the shelves or in the wild, or we import. Now, if we import, the postage or courier charges are such that it can almost double the cost of a purchase. So that tends to put a bit of a restriction on what I can and cannot buy. So that's why this is the American box set, not the British one. Now we've got that out of the way. Welcome to the show. Let's kick off and have a look inside the box. The idea to bring out a Beatles box set collection had been around for a few years. Obviously, you had all the original versions of the albums that had come out. Then in 1978, there was I believe there was a Mo-Fi version of it. I've never seen it, and it was certainly not in the wild. That would be fantastic to own. But there hadn't been another re-release of it for some considerable time. So, coming up to the early mid-2000s, it was decided by Apple Records and the remaining Beatles it would be a good time to bring out a box set of their work. Who do you get to do something like that? Who do you get to mix an album, a box set like that? George Martin obviously would be the first choice. The man that was selected was the chief mastering engineer at Apple Records, a guy called Sean McGee. He's worked at Abbey Road Studios since the early 90s. So he's pretty familiar with how everything works there. He's also worked with, I think, Deep Purple, Pill from memory, and more importantly, had been approached, well, for me anyway, more importantly, had been approached by Rush to remix their vinyl collection as well. So, decision was taken to master the Beatles back catalogue on 180 gram vinyl, not from the original mastered tapes, however, because working with the original masters would be very, very difficult. Not every track is in stereo because the masters simply didn't exist. The other consideration, stereo used to be mixed with music coming out of one channel and vocals coming out of another channel. Now the EQ on that would be totally out. So significant thought needed to be put into how they were going to remix these albums whilst retaining the integrity of that true Beatles sound and yet using modelling equipment and making it sound as good as they possibly can. It's a great sounding box set. I love it. Let's start off. I'll open my flap for you. And the first thing we find in here is this beautiful book. I can't go through every single page because we're going to be here forever. So I'll just skim through. But there's a section dedicated to each of the albums. There we go. How's that? That's better. As you can see, it's absolutely beautiful. Such good quality. Just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful book. You can see the quality of it. It's really thick. Representing the White Album, I believe there. Just fantastic. That's a beautiful book. It would grace any coffee table. Not mine, obviously, because I'd spill coffee on it. Normally, when I go through a record collection or something similar like this, I try to hide or at least cover up what the next album in the collection is likely to be. But I figure with the Beatles collection, there's not a lot of point in me doing that. So what we will do is go straight into the box set. Now, again, I'm not a Beatles expert. I don't proclaim to be a Beatles expert. Therefore, I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on this particular expose because there are plenty of people out there that do Beatles minutiae down to the nth degree. I'm not playing that game. All I'm doing is showing you what's in this box set. Okay? So we got that clear. Good. Right. First one, surprise, surprise. Please Please Me came out in 1963 and is the first official launch album by the band. Now, with most of the early stuff, there wasn't a great deal of thought put into any of the packaging. This photo was taken, I believe, at EMI Studios. Originally, it was supposed to be taken outside of London Zoo or something like that, some kind of story attached to it. I'm sure someone knows the story, but this particular picture was taken at EMI Studios. Back again. A lot of albums from the 1960s have an awful lot of information in very small print on the back of the albums. You don't tend to find inner sleeves with information on, or booklets or anything like that. So you do tend to find this quite a lot in 1960s albums. Not just by the Beatles, of course, but by anyone. There is your track listing, as if anyone didn't already know it. The album itself is on the Parlophone label, which is, of course, the British version, even though this is the American box set. It's the British reproduction. And I will just get one out because they all look pretty similar. But there you go. In stereo. Stereo because I like stereo. Okay? It's a choice. It's a lifestyle choice thing. So, Please Please Me, first Beatles album. Can we guess what's next out of the box? Well, you old Beatles fans will know. Another iconic album cover with the Beatles also came out in 1963. I did a little bit of background research, which will come as a surprise to any of you. This photo was actually taken in a hotel in Bournemouth, a city where I lived for many years. And there you go. I didn't know that myself, but they were playing in Bournemouth that night when this photo was taken. So, and the reason that Ringo is at the bottom is for no other reason than he was the newest to join the band and allegedly the shortest. I don't know. That's what I read. So there you go. Beautiful. Again, typical 1960s. Too much information on the back to actually be able to take it all in. Track listing, most of you would be very, very familiar with already. Even though these are the stereo versions, as I said, there are a couple of songs on here there are no stereo copies of, or no stereo masters of, therefore they are still in mono. There you go, Parlophone again. Beautifully presented, and they feel, all 180 gram records feel, I suppose they feel like they're 180 grams, but they do give a certain heft, which I like to feel in an album. So there you go, album number 2. And the second one in 1963. So now we move into 1964, a very good year indeed. And surprise, surprise, the first album by the Beatles that came out in 1964 was, of course, this, A Hard Day's Night. Side 1 consists of the soundtrack from the film, and side 2 other tracks from the Beatles. Again, this is another iconic album cover. Whether it's iconic because of the Beatles or they just made iconic album covers, I'm not really sure, but I love them all. Parlophone again inside, as one might imagine. Your track listing on the back there. Side 1, side 2. And if for those of you that are more musically inclined, A Hard Day's Night, of course, starts with that chord, which had George, Paul and John all playing a slightly weird dystonic chord. That was analysed recently by Randy Bachman from Bachman Turner Overdrive, who had access to the master tapes somehow, I don't know, but actually worked out what they all were. And if you're really interested, there's plenty of instructional videos on YouTube, which is actually worth a look. It's quite interesting to see how the boys came up with that sound. This album is also the first Beatles album to consist entirely of tracks that they wrote themselves. There's no cover versions, so this is the sort of beginning coming of age of the Beatles and their confidence in their own songwriting. Still in 1964, we have another album, so that's two in 1963. This is the second one in 1964 with the Beatles. Now, this is the first Beatles album that actually has a gatefold sleeve, which is nice. There you go. Containing a track listing, which I'll close in for you if I can. There, it's not easy. There you go. The recording of the album actually also spawned I Feel Fine, which was released as a non-album single. So there you go. Band looking a little bit morbid, looking a little bit tired on this album as well, which is probably reflective of where they were, because Beatlemania was obviously in full swing at the time. This album also contains a few covers as well. I think there's about 3 or 4 cover versions on here as well, which is probably more indicative of the fact that the pressure that the Beatles were under to maintain a high level of releases. 2 albums a year seems, it's a big ask for anybody. So probably running a little bit short on material when you consider that they were actually touring at the time as well. So I'm not surprised there's a couple of cover versions on this one. Still very good out. Well, what am I saying? It's a Beatles album. Of course it's very good. And additionally, once again, it's on Parlophone. Beatles, For Sale, album number 4. On to 1965. Another 2 offerings from the Beatles came out in 1965, but they were both very different offerings. The first of which, of course, we would know from the album Help. Help consists, again, well, funnily enough, of 2 sides. The first side consists of soundtrack from the movie. The second side contains various other tracks. The original plan, as many would know, was to have the Beatles signing the word help in semaphore, but they decided, or the photographer decided, it didn't look right, so they just played around with different shapes until they got what they wanted. So this album could also be known as NVUP or NUVP, can't remember which way around it is. I think it's actually different in America and England. I think this is NUVP, this is the British version. And of course the conspiracy theorists came out with all sorts of stuff as to what that really stood for. It just meant it made a better picture. Personally, I think they should have stuck with Help. It would have made more sense. But there you go. Again, it's on the Parlophone label. Back of the album, here you go. So here is your track listing. Be familiar with most of those tracks. Nice pictures of the boys. Yesterday, track 6 on side 2. In the Guinness Book of Records as the world's most covered song. So all of you budding guitarists out there, get plucking. If you want to know what the chord sequence is, again, this is not the right channel for you, but there are plenty out there that will know. So 1965, this is the first one that came out. The second album that came out in 1965, Rubber Soul. And this is a very different proposition. Now, as most of you would know, 1965 was a pretty big year for the Beatles, including that famous Shea Stadium concert. This album was recorded when they returned to Britain from the US. It was recorded in October-November 1965, released in December. They had to get this out for a Christmas deadline in order to their contract, which was releasing 2 records a year, which by today's standards seems ridiculous. Marked a little bit of a turn, probably the big turn for the Beatles. First of all, stylistically, again, quite a dark, foreboding cover. The photograph apparently taken in John Lennon's garden. Doesn't actually mention the Beatles' name on the front either. It's just a picture of the band. On the back, again, it's fairly, standard 1960s fare. Your track listing. Only two tracks on this album are covers, so the rest of them are by the band themselves. Again, on the Parlophone label, consistent with all the others. Another little touch I love is the reproduction of these is such that even on the bottom there's an advert for Emetex record cleaner, which I personally have never heard of, but I just love the fact there's a little advert on the back of an album. I couldn't imagine that happening today without considerable payment, I would imagine, from the marketing department. Whilst the Beatles were in America, they met many people, I'm sure, but specifically they met with Bob Dylan and with Elvis Presley, and the influence of not so much gospel but folk, rock, a little bit of psychedelia start to appear on this album. This is a distinct, marked move away from the pop sound that had been the Beatles really to this day. This is where they start becoming a serious muso band and start using the studio more as an instrument than just a place to record. Those in the know say that this is you can actually start to tell that there's some musical friction between John and Paul on this album. I can't particularly pick that myself. I'm not that not that close to the Beatles, but still, this very, very influential, very important album. As I say, it marks significant change in the direction that the Beatles were taking. So this is album number 6. 1966 was a bit of a slack year for the Beatles because they only brought out one album, but it was fair to say it was a reasonable one. The next one in the pack is Revolver. This was the last album recorded whilst the Beatles were still touring. So after this album, they ceased touring. So this album came out in the middle of 1965, just after they'd been in America on the famous Jesus tour, when all their albums were... Oh, you know what happened. I didn't go through that story for you, but it was then. So as far as the album is concerned, again, on the Parlophone label, nothing flash on the inside, and just a standard sleeve. The artwork was done by Klaus Vormann, and it's supposed to represent a radical departure from their previous image, which reflects the radical departure or change of direction of their music. So the track listing on the back: Taxman, Little Rigby, Tomorrow Never Knows, She Said. Personally, Taxman's a bit of a favourite of mine, I have to say. So look, it's a really cool looking album. Oh, hang on, have I found something inside? No, I haven't. It's a really cool looking album, and one of my personal favourite Beatles albums. This is one of the contenders for which is the best Beatles record. How can you possibly choose Rubber Soul, Revolver? We've got Sgt. Pepper coming up, the White Album, Abbey Road, Let It Be. I mean, how many contenders do you need? Everybody has their favourite Beatles album. This isn't mine, but it's certainly up there among. Revolver, the Beatles' 7th album, which came out in 1966. So what happens when you stop touring? You have, let's be honest, an unlimited budget. You're the biggest band in the entire world, and you have no pressure, no timeline pressure to bring out an album in order to meet your contract. Well, this happens. I don't think I even need to introduce this one. It is at least very iconic. Who Everybody Is on the front there is one of those great games that you can play if you want to play Trivial Pursuit, although I do have a guide. The inside cover, probably not the best dress period for the group. You must... what can you say? Not the best dressed, in my opinion, at least. On the back are all the lyrics for the songs on there. Of particular note for me on this album as well, you have that opening chord on A Hard Day's Night that you know instantly what it is. The chord at the end of A Day in the Life, that sustained E, which goes on for it seems like 40 minutes, but it's 40 seconds roughly, which is just a wonderful thing to have when you just have one chord, and it says so much. And to this day, E is still my favourite chord. Some say it should be D minor, but no, it's E. As with the rest of the collection, it's on Parlophone label, standard white inner sheet. However, we've got a few more goodies with this one. First of all, we have the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Cover Band brochure. Now, I think this may have come as the inner sleeve on the original album. Not sure. And on the back there, you have the key as to who everybody is on that front cover. And if all those names rhymed, then Billy Joel might have used it. Well, we didn't start the fire, but he didn't. Also comes with stickers. Well, not actually stickers, they're on a piece of cardboard. And that is the inner sleeve proper that comes with this collection. So this is slightly more elaborately packaged than some of the earlier stuff. Incidentally, had a massive influence on psychedelia music over the coming decades. Also prog rock. I think you could argue this was, as far as I'm aware, this was the first concept album that was released, which had a huge impact on the prog rock world. Let's be honest, no one loves a concept album like a prog rock band. In 1967, Beatles continued with the psychedelia theme with the release of the Magical Mystery Tour. Now, this is a contentious one because in the UK this was not released as an album. This was released as a double EP, 6 tracks. In America, however, EPs were not popular, so it was decided to release this as an album. So, the original EP comprised of the tracks on side A and the LP on the tracks on side 2 of the American album. So, here it is on a gatefold sleeve. There are the tracks inside, as you can see, with lyrics over here. The back is a little bit psychedelic, as one might expect. So, as I was saying, Britain, this is a double EP. In America, it's an album. A gatefold sleeve, but not a double album. If we look at the other bits and pieces that come inside, well, the album is on Capitol, which is their Beatles American label, as opposed to Parlophone, which all the others have been on, because, as I say, this was not released as an album in the UK. The album, I keep calling it that, the item also comes with this book, which comprises of stills and various bits and pieces from the TV movie, Magical Mystery Tour. This album is, for want of, am I allowed to call it an album? I'm going to. This album is not many people's favourites. It comes in for a lot of flack. The reason being it's hot on the heels of Sgt. Pepper, which was considered a classic. Additionally, Brian Epstein had died whilst they were making and putting this together, so many accusations are that it lacks some cohesion. Personally, I like this album. As I've said in the Black Sabbath episodes, it's unfair to compare a band's work against its previous work. You need to compare this album against what else was coming out by other bands and being released at the same time, and this is way ahead of what else was coming out. So comparing it to the Beatles' Mastery that came before it is a little unfair. Yes, it's one of their weaker offerings, but nonetheless an extremely good piece of work. 1968 was also quite a quiet year for the Beatles on the grounds that they only released one album that year, albeit a double album, and albeit a fairly significant one. The Beatles, imaginatively called the Beatles. There you go, you can just about see it. The Beatles, also known, of course, as the White Album. This album cover alone has inspired a great deal of other albums, such as Metallica's Black Album, Spinal Tap's Black Album, and more importantly, Primus's Brown Album. The inner sleeve, that's a gatefold. There is a track listing. Nothing on the back, so just plain. The reason the Beatles chose to go for this particular look was to starkly contrast against the psychedelia of the previous 2 releases, which are very, very brightly coloured. Musically, as I say, this is a double album. George Martin wanted it to be a single album and cut out what he considered a lot of filler. Whereas the Beatles on previous albums had experimented with various different musical styles and influences within the one track, this album tends to have more tracks that stick to one particular style throughout. And as such, I believe it's more a collection of solo work than, I mean, yes, there are some obvious classic Beatles stuff on here, but a lot of this stuff wouldn't really be that far missing on some of their solo albums. Should it be a single album? Not getting into that. This one is not numbered, so for those of you who don't know, all the White albums that were released as albums in and of their own right come with a number. and that number obviously keeps going up the more albums that are pressed. The lower number you have, assuming that the album is good condition, the more valuable the record. I'm not too sure. It had 001. I'm assuming it was McCartney. It might have been Ringo actually who sold it recently. I seem to have heard that somewhere. But this has no number because it's part of a box set. The actual albums themselves, the vinyl themselves, come on Apple, which was the period when obviously the Beatles had got tired of signing for record labels and decided to bring out their own record label. I've always loved this record label. One thing I have always loved is the B-side of the album. So, sorry, I hold it. Oh, wee, that was expensive nearly. Hold it the correct way up. Now, is it just my mind? Is it? I don't know. I'm British. I just have a scatological mind. But I've always found that cover a little bit more suggestive than perhaps the Beatles intended it to be. As far as the rest of the packaging is concerned, this package comes with 4 photographs. I don't know who these boys are, but nice moustache. Look at that. Oh, that is fantastic. John. There you go. So it comes with those, and also a little booklet as well, which... Oh, no, sort of a booklet with a poster. Okay, I've done it gently. So this is the album poster that comes with the White Album, as we all like to call it. Lyrics are on the back, as I say it's a double album, so there's quite a lot of lyrics. So I shall fold that carefully and put it back. Now the White Album is probably the most serious contender for best Beatles album. Again, for me it's extremely good. Is it my favourite? No. Would it be my favourite if it was a single album? Well, that's an interesting argument, but I'll let that sit there. So 1968, the Beatles' 9th official album, but depending on whether or not you count Magical Mystery Tour as 8.5 or 9. An album that was recorded before the White Album but released after it, I think illustrates beautifully some sublime to the ridiculous. The sublime being the White Album. The ridiculous, well, that's probably a little bit harsh, but Yellow Submarine, what can one say? This is probably the first album I ever heard which was strictly, it reeks of contractual obligation. The album consists of tracks that were already kicking around in the studio, that were bits and pieces left off other albums that the Beatles for some reason or other had decided not to use on the previous albums, but made an appearance on here. So the cynical among you may say that this was a contractual obligation album. Those who love this album may say it was a masterpiece. Who knows? There's your track listing. Artwork is very much in the vein of Sgt. Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour, as you can tell, in distinct contrast to the White Album, which, as I said, was recorded after this. Inner sleeve for the album is a little bit brighter than some of their other releases. Some liner notes as well. Original US liner notes there. I assume that the British one came on ordinary label. And as far as the album is concerned, once again it's on Apple. I want to get it out after the last episode. Apple. It's one of those albums that if you're a Beatles fan and you're a completist, that of course you're going to have. That it's got its highlights. It's got some good stuff on there. But even comparing it to what else was around at the time, it's not their proudest moment. But still better than anything I've ever put out. Toward the end of their recording together as the Beatles, they seem to make a little bit of a habit of releasing stuff in a different order to when it was recorded. Those of you who are currently enjoying the movie Get Back, and as I said, I've watched episode 1 of it so far, and I hope to finish it this weekend. It's brilliant. I absolutely love it and recommend it highly. The album, Abbey Road. The last album the Beatles ever recorded. This was recorded after the Get Back sessions. However, it was released before the Get Back sessions came out as another album. Well, it was Let It Be, so I'm not going to lie. How many people have been to Abbey Road Studios and tried to reproduce that particular photo? I'm sure the local traffic absolutely love it, especially the neighbours. They must find it hysterically funny. Back of the album, there we are, actually taken from the street sign, track listing. is pretty much faultless. Wonderful, wonderful album, as they all are. Personally, for me, the Beatles got better the longer they went on. For others, they peaked in the middle and then died out towards the end. It depends on your particular musical taste, I guess. This came out in 1969. Interestingly, they started recording on Abbey Road only 3 weeks after the Get Back sessions. It's very interesting and just shows you the prolific musicality, and just the pure amount of music that those guys came out with was just phenomenal. They're not even 30 and they're the biggest thing in the world, the biggest band in the world, and one could argue still are. So Abbey Road came out in 1969 after the Get Back sessions, as I said. There we go. Again, standard Apple label. You can tell on this album that there's a lot of animosity or a lot of push and pull between Lennon and McCartney. Before this album was released, Lennon had already left about 7 days, so a week after the album was finished, and the formal announcement didn't come out for a few months. But there you go, Abbey Road, classic. Which brings us to the very last formal studio album by the Beatles, one that is getting a lot of attention at the moment, Let It Be. Recorded before Abbey Road, released after Abbey Road. So this was recorded in 69, released in 70, or 68, 69, released in 70, after the Beatles had officially broken up. Track listing on the back, as if you didn't know this already. I don't think I'm going to tell you really much about this album because, as I say, there's so much about it in the news at the moment. This is my favourite Beatles album. There you go, I've said it. I'm out there. I know I may be a bit weird. I know I've upset some of the purists. This is my favourite Beatles album. There's no accounting for taste. Personally, I believe the Beatles got better as they went along. You could argue Abbey Road then should be my favourite. It's my second favourite. So, there we go. Let's call it a double album. Here we go. It's 1970. The 12th album by the Beatles, depending on how you count. My favourite. It's a masterpiece. You have to own this one. If you don't own any other Beatles records, ooh, should it just be this one? Oh, that's contentious. For me, yeah. But I'd also want Revolver, and I'd want Rubber Soul, and I'd want the White Album, and I'd want Sgt. Pepper as well. I'd want them all. This, though, is one that you must have. So, is that it? Well, not quite, because this box set holds another little surprise at the end. The Past Masters set. Now, the Past Masters set was released in 1988 to commemorate the release of the Beatles CD collection being released. But it came out on double CD, but also, here it is, on double album. There's a lovely picture of the guys. So, whilst this is not part of the official canon, it does contain some really important tracks. The Beatles were renowned for releasing quite a few singles and B-sides that didn't actually appear on any albums, and what this does is collate those. Here's the track listing on the back. Now, there may be some really interesting tracks for you guys on there that you assume that were on albums that were actually not. Some really, really interesting stuff on there that for the completist you simply must have. So all of these tracks were recorded during the same period of all the albums being recorded. So these are not post-recorded or played with in any way. So these are just recordings that you would be missing if you just had the studio albums. So I think that's a really nice touch to have that in the box set as well. We have Past Masters Part 1, which is on Parlophone, which consists of all their earlier stuff, and the later career stuff is on the second album in the box set, or in the double album set on Apple, which is really nice. Comes with a nice little brochure as well, which explains how the albums was come about and how it was compiled, and a little bit about all the tracks on there as well. So I thought that was a really nice way to round out the box set. That is not the end of my Beatles collection, however. This is purely the box set. So if you'd like to know what other classic albums I have from the Beatles, in my collection. I shall be covering off that in the following episodes. So hope you enjoyed this. As I said, I'm not a Beatles expert. I've not set myself up as, so I haven't actually gone into as much detail about the recording of these albums as I would with many of my other albums, purely because there are so many purists out there. So I hope you've enjoyed having a look through that. Please join me for the next episode when I'll have a look at some of the other really good Beatles stuff that I've got in my collection. So stay grumpy, keep rocking, see you soon.